Miamians, there was a little-known guy by the name of Jeb Bush who was appointed to co-chair with a little-known guy by the name of Alva Chapman, who had been the publisher of the Miami Herald, the editor of the Miami Herald, the chairman of Knight Ridder, and from my perspective, the 900-pound gorilla from a community participation perspective. He's the individual who headed We Will Rebuild after Hurricane Andrew. He was the guy who led the president's crusade against drugs. And then another little-known guy by the name of Alex Pinellas, who was a county commissioner at the time. So they came up with this plan, and it called for a number of things. And what they had always said back then was, you need a plan, you need money, and you need leadership if you really want to put together an effort to end homelessness. And for those, again, that are here a long time, you will recall we had over 8,000 people living on the streets at that time. And so the trust was born a year later. It called for a permanent funding source, which is our food and beverage tax. We're the only place in the United States of America where the community has chosen to help own the issue by taxing themselves in an effort to help fund the end of homelessness. And we are the only community that not only has that kind of a recurring revenue stream, but a plan. We're a 27-person board made up of the community. There are, of the 27 seats, I am the only individual that has served continuously for the 22 years of the Trust's existence. I've either chaired the full board, the executive committee, the finance committee during that time. I thought I was signing on for a 2-year or 3-year gig, Pastor, but I've been there all this time, and I've been there all this time because the fight to end homelessness has not concluded in our community. And we run a $64 million budget, and we have faith-based leaders on our board, we have educators, we have formerly homeless, we have business leaders and the like. And in fact, Pastor, we're going to ask you to try to fill one of the open religious seats on our board. So be careful what you ask for, you might get it. And so we're going to bring you into our home.
That was a smooth move.
That you're building.
We'll see. I just had a baby this week. Just switching
gears. We're not going to take no for an answer, folks.
Switching gears slightly, why are you personally interested in this? We all know that something needs to be done, but how did you personally get involved in this?
Well, this group came to Tallahassee. I'm a lawyer lobbyist by education and by trade. I run the largest lobbying practice at the state capitol. We have offices here and in Tallahassee. And this group of individuals, led by, at that time, Archbishop McCarthy, Monsignor Walsh, Rabbi Schiff, Alva Chapman, Alex Pinellas, Armando Codina, came to Tallahassee to figure out how to pass this food and beverage tax. It had to be passed by the legislature. And they called on me to help do this from a pro bono perspective. And as a man who grew up in this community, and I had 3 children at the time, and I got tired of trying to explain to my children why every time we went to the old arena in downtown, why people were wheeling all their worldly belongings in shopping carts and the like, and living under the expressways. And I felt like I had a responsibility to do something about it. And to mix a little bit of scripture in, Pastor, to those that much is given, much is expected. And I felt I had an obligation to do something about it, and I've been in ever since.
So let's get super practical. There isn't any of us, I don't think, who have been in a position where we're out walking just from here after church to wherever we might brunch or go home or do whatever we do, and we're going to walk past somebody. And often that person asks us for money, and then there's this experience of guilt initially, not sure what to do, not sure how to make a difference. How should someone respond when someone asks you for money, and what's the best way that ordinary folks like us can be a blessing to those who are in need?
Goodness. Let me tell you the first 2 things that are not always popular for me to say you shouldn't do. First of all, I'm going to look all of you that I can in the face and tell you all, from the left side of the congregation to the far right side, nobody will ever accuse this man of being anti-homeless or insensitive to homeless issues or the needs or concerns of homeless. But one of the worst things you can do is drop spare change into those buckets, cups, and hats. It does nothing to end homelessness. It buys no beds. It buys no services. It buys nothing to end homelessness. We did a survey several years ago. Believe it or not, over $40 million gets dropped into buckets, cups, and hats in this community every year. Some people sit out on the streets and they collect $600, $700, $800 a day in cash. That is their job. Half of the panhandlers in our community are not homeless. The other half are, and they're not putting that spare change into anything good. You make it more difficult for us to end homelessness. We're in the business of ending homelessness, not in perpetuating it. So those that are homeless, you help them sustain themselves by dropping spare change into those buckets, cups, and hats. We have meters around our town. And by the way, in the back, we have these cards. The small card is known as our Hopeless Helpline card. When somebody solicits you for spare change, a panhandler, hand them one of our cards. Tell them we have beds for them. Tell them we have shelters for them. But giving them spare change, that instant gratification, if you will, that makes you feel good, you are doing something humanitarian, I promise you it does nothing to help us end homelessness. And the second thing, feeding people on the streets does nothing to end homelessness. It sustains people right here on Brickell when people feed them on the streets. You do nothing to help our outreach teams. We have 21 outreach teams. They're called the Green Shirts. They go out every single day, Pastor, to greet the homeless and to work to bring them into our shelters, to bring them in, if you will, to our housing. And it is about housing. It's no longer all about shelter. It's about what you have behind you. It's about homes. It's about housing. And the second piece of material we have in the back is about our Rent Connect program, which urges community citizens to make housing available. We pay rent. Our formerly homeless individuals have housing vouchers that allow us, if you will, to help get them off the streets and into permanent housing, and we would urge you to use it. But feeding people on the streets does a couple of things. Number one, makes it harder for them to come in because they can sustain themselves on the streets. Number two, it's really a health issue to feed people on the streets. There are no facilities on the streets to wash your hands or to get rid of their garbage. They drop their garbage out on the streets. It brings other health hazards to them, and frankly, we try to balance the interests of people in the community, property owners as well, and it does nothing to help us. And I can tell you, we've got an encampment on 71st Street and Northwest 35th Avenue. There are 100 plus people out there, and the Department of Health is about to declare that a health crisis in our community. That's how bad it is. It just doesn't do anything to help us. So we urge you to be constructive. Call the numbers on our cards, and we have places you can help feed people indoors. We have indoor feeding programs that we help fund. We will give you guidance on where to feed people if that's what you want to do. We understand the instant gratification of serving somebody hamburgers or pizzas or anything else on the streets, but it doesn't help us access them to bring them in. We want it to be more difficult to stay on the streets, not easier.
So that was a long, tough thing to hear for a lot of us, because one of the things that we do here at the church, I'm not sure if you know this, folks are knocking on our doors every day here. And one of the challenges that we have is, on the one hand, we want to show them our love and support, and on the other hand, do it in a way that actually works. And that's a challenge for us here. But one of the specific challenges we face here as a community that's full of folks who are both homeless and non-homeless, even just this morning, is we struggle to know how to help those who suffer from mental illnesses. We have folks that we know very well here and have had over the years who are homeless and have a mental illness, and we can't seem to find a way to connect with them in a way that helps. Can you give us any advice for that on what would be effective?
First of all, using the homeless helpline to give them a card, but if you call us, we will send our outreach workers out, sometimes one at a time. One at a time, we go and approach them. Look, we're extremely aware that and by the way, we just did what's known as a PIT count, P-I-T. It's known as a point-in-time survey. HUD requires all continuums in the United States once a year to count any time during the last 10 days of January. We had a slight uptick in street homeless, but we had the largest decrease in total homelessness that we have had since we began counting almost 19, 20 years ago when we started the original count. And the count just took place, and we had an 8% total decrease in homelessness. We're down to a little over 1,000 people street homeless, of which about 60+% are chronic. And that chronic population is made up of individuals, again, primarily with mental health related issues, co-occurring substance abuse and alcohol. They're tough to reach. They're hard to understand. It's one of the reasons why we run a program called Project Lazarus. We send healthcare professionals out on the streets every single day of the week to take, if you will, psychotropic medications to them. Number one, they're safer to themselves if they're getting their meds. The community is safer, and our outreach teams have a better opportunity to access those with mental health issues to come in and to take us up on the opportunity to go into permanent housing. Because today, it's more about permanent housing than it is transitional/shelter housing. Because shelters are, the chronic are now very resistant. In our surveys that we just did over the last week and a half when we did our PIT count, the most frequent response we got from those still on the streets were they want housing. And housing first is where we turn those keys over to them without a commitment to drug test, without a commitment for anything. Our caseworkers work them to accept our services and get them off the streets permanently.
Thank you. So I hope this is helpful to you all. This is helping me out a lot, but one question I have for you is, what do you wish churches or other faith-based organizations were doing, and what do you wish they weren't doing? You know, like how can we as an organization hurt, and how can we help?
You hurt by serving people on the streets, and so many of the faith-based groups somehow believe, even with all of what we try to do to take the message to the community, there's a better way to feed the homeless in an organized way, bringing them into houses of worship or other places to feed them 1 day a week, 2 days a week, once a month. So that's the first thing you can do that is bad when you're feeding them on the streets, but extraordinarily helpful to us if you'll come into our indoor feeding program. I think the second thing is that you have a lot of members of your congregation who have rental housing that we really need access to. And that's what the Rent Connect program is about. And we're looking for property managers, landlords, property owners who will rent housing to us. We pay. We've got veterans right now that have been sitting in shelter, waiting. They've got housing vouchers that guarantee their rent. They're people that have been in counseling, that are stabilized, looking for places to go. And I'm desperate as chairman of the trust to get those things available to us, to get those resources available to us. Those are the two most important things, I think, from a congregational perspective that you can do. And we do a Homeless Awareness Day every year. It will be coming in the fall. We will let you know when that is. We would encourage your congregants to participate in our Homeless Awareness Day, which again brings that message to the community. I want to say to you, when we started 22 and a half years ago, folks, those of you that have been here a long time, you will remember, you didn't have an expressway bypass where we didn't have homeless people living in cardboard shanties and in plywood shanties right to the north of American Airlines Arena. They were all in that finger in it, living along the shoreline there, over 8,000. Tonight, there'll be a little over 1,000. It's a 90% decrease in street homelessness in our community in 22 years. It says that the program we're using is working. We're a 6-time best practice model named by Republican and Democratic secretaries of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. People complain about the things we do in our community that are bad. Let me tell you the one thing we do. We do homelessness well, and we do it better than any place in the country, but we do it because people like you are helping us end homelessness. And what I beg from you is that you be a part of our continuum, because we need you.
So maybe just one last question, but that's pretty awesome, right?
We need you.
So one last question, maybe before we wrap it up. Can you talk to us about a success story? Something that you've seen go really well. So, and this is my short story. This week I had the opportunity to meet with Vicki, who's the director, executive director of the Homeless Trust. And I was walking over to the other side of the bridge, which is scary for Brickell people. But I crossed the bridge, and I was over there, and we had lunch at Jimmy John's. And while we were having lunch at Jimmy John's, there was an altercation between two people across the street. And one of the things that impressed me so much was, where I would see that event and I would say, whoa, be careful. She ran toward it. She got up from where she was at least 4 times during our lunch to go make sure that everything was okay, called people who came and assisted and did a million things. And I was just so thankful to know that there's people who have such a heart for serving those in need like you. But help us. Tell us about a time where you saw someone transition from a place of brokenness and pain to a place of thriving. And how did that go?
Wow. You said your first question was a softball. Your last question is the softest ball you've thrown at me. Folks, we've got some of the most life-altering success stories, and I'm really privileged and honored to be here to share them with you. And I'm actually going to tell you 3 brief, quick ones, not just one. So first of all, if you go over to the Publix right over here at Mary Brickell Village, there's an African-American woman who is the greeter there. That young lady, Anita Martin, was on the streets for 15 years as a crackhead. In 1997, there's a picture on the front page of the Miami Herald laying flat on her back, 8.5 months pregnant. 8.5 months pregnant. This woman came into our care 6.5 or 7 years ago. Today, by the way, she had that baby. She put that baby up for adoption, as she did one of her other children. That lady is now 5+ years sober, clean, works right here at your Publix, right here, employed, self-sustaining, in housing. Think about it. And 2 years ago, we reunited her with those 2 children who she put up for adoption as a homeless crack addict on our streets. No longer. Number 2, just this week in the halls of Tallahassee, another success story. A gentleman who came into our hack on North Miami Avenue, a homeless assistance center that we own and operate. This gentleman, we put him through Miami-Dade College. We put him through FIU. We put him through law school. He runs a not-for-profit in Orlando. And the Felons' Rights Constitutional Amendment, the restoration of felons' rights constitutional amendment, was spearheaded by this man. It will be on the ballot. That's a success story. 12 years a crackhead on our streets. 12 years. Story number 3. There is, again, you can't make these stories up. Another gentleman, 13 years a crackhead. He was fully recovering. He was in our jobs program. He was working for an empanada maker here in town, the largest empanada maker in the United States of America. He went in to be trained. Today, he's married to a principal in a public school here. He supervises 85 people now and runs the empanada factory. He opens it every day at 5 o'clock in the morning. He has the keys to the business. A crackhead on our streets. That's success. That's what we do. We bring them in. We get them clean. We find them housing. We find them employment. And we do it because our community embraces them. Our community embraces them. That's how you help make a difference. And you help make a difference like a young lady sitting 5 rows back with her children. She is involved with a parent organization at Ransom. They were involved recently in our Homeless Awareness Day, where we made these small houses. We had them painted as a piece of art so that as we move along housing people, young people have become part of our continuum. Those little houses that we made for Homeless Awareness Day will become the first piece of art in new housing for people that we house as homeless folks in our community going forward, and we thank you for that. That's what you can do.
Can we give him a round of applause for coming here this morning? Stay here, stay here. So one of the things that we know if we want to be disciples of Jesus is we have to love people. It's not an option. And in fact, we have to love all people everywhere. And there are people all around us who need God's love, including our love. So one of the things we're going to do here to end this series, and as we talk about homelessness, we want to remember anyone who comes to your mind who's broken or who's hurting. And one of the things you'll find on page 8 of your bulletin, if you could open it up, you're going to find a little note card right here. And here's what we're going to ask you to do as we conclude this series and talk about homelessness. Everyone was handed a Sharpie as well when they walked into the service today. What we're going to ask you to do is to take a minute and when you're ready, write the name of someone who's broken or who's hurting in your world on that card. And you don't have to write their real name. It could be any name that works. And what we're going to ask you to do is you're going to come forward whenever you're ready or whenever you feel like it. There are pins in this bowl. And what we're going to ask you to do is to pin the name of all the people that you know who are lost to this house. To this house. And we'll talk about it when we're done. But this is a little interactive piece that we're asking you to do. It may not be easy, but take a minute, write down the name of someone who you know is hurting and in pain. You can even just write a description. And then whenever you're ready, this is going to take a couple minutes, come forward, grab a pen, and put it somewhere on the wood up here, anywhere you want. Thank you. Go ahead, John. You can be the first one. Friends, this is a reminder that if we take away the wood, we find out what the church is really made up of, and it's people. And it's people who are lost. Every single one of us one time could have been that note card. Maybe you wrote your own name up there today. We want you to know that in this place you have a home, and that the God of the universe calls you his child, and that there's always hope. We're so thankful for our guest speaker this morning. We're going to leave this up after the service as a reminder to all of us that God came to seek and to save the lost. Please remain seated for our offering.